Good morning, Bible scholars. That's you. That's you right now for clicking on this video. You are a Bible scholar. Hello. If this is your first time on my channel, welcome. My name is Taneza. I'm the mom of 3 fantastical children living in the heart of New York City. I'm on an adventure. I am reading through the Bible this year. I would love for you to be a part of my YouTube family. I call you guys my tribe. And then I have a special sector called my Bible scholars. All you have to do is hit that subscribe button below. We have read Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus. We are now deep into Numbers. So today we will be reviewing Numbers chapters 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. Let's jump right in. All right, so in chapter 11 of Numbers, this is, I have my notes, fire from the Lord. Numbers chapter 11. Chapter 11 verse 1 reads, before I get started, I'm reading from the New International Version. Any translation of the Bible that you're working with, stick with it. If you don't have a Bible, no worries. Every verse I read, I'll put on the screen for you. Okay, let's get started. Numbers 11 verse 1. Now the people complained about their hardships in the hearing of the Lord, and when he heard them, his anger was aroused. Then fire from the Lord burned among them and consumed some of the outskirts of the camp. Numbers chapter 11 verse 2. When the people cried out to Moses, he prayed to the Lord, and the fire died down. All right, in my notes, Israelites began to complain about the manna. So they're complaining, they're tired of the manna. They speak of the fish they had in Egypt, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. And again, they're complaining. They don't want this manna. They're tired of eating the manna. In verse 11, this is Moses. Moses asked the Lord, "Why have you brought this trouble on your servant? What have I done to displease you that you put the burden of all these people on me?" So again, all of these Israelites are going to Moses as a leader and complaining to him. And he is just getting overwhelmed with the complaints because he's bearing the burden of it. I think in a couple of videos I've mentioned that I got this Bible from my husband when we were dating back in 2006. So that's how many years ago, tribe? Is that 17 years ago? That's crazy. 17 years ago. And I always like to read out loud what has been underlined already. I like to share it with my tribe. So my husband had verse 14 underlined. He wrote in the margin, Moses was exhausted. Verse 14, I cannot carry all these people by myself. The burden is too heavy for me. Verse 15, if this is how you are going to treat me, put me to death right now. If I have found favor in your eyes, and do not let me face my own ruin. So the Lord listens to Moses, being overwhelmed, being exhausted. And he tells Moses, in my notes I have, to gather 70 of the Israelite leaders and bring them all to the tent of meeting. Verses 17 and 18 of chapter 11. I will come, speaking, the Lord is speaking, I will come down and speak with you there. I will take of the spirit that is on you and put the spirit on them, the 70 Israelite leaders. They will help you to carry the burden of the people so that you will not have to carry it alone. Verse 18, tell the people, consecrate yourselves in preparation for tomorrow when you will eat meat. The Lord heard you when you wailed, if only we had meat to eat. We were better off in Egypt. Now the Lord will give you meat and you will eat it. So again, the Israelites are complaining. They complain to Moses, who asks the Lord for some relief. So in my notes I have, the Lord will provide meat for a whole month, he says, not even days or weeks, but for a whole month. Moses does question the Lord because even if all the flocks and the herds that the Israelites were tending and they owned were killed, that still would not be enough meat for the Israelites. So remember, there are over 600,000 men alone. when you count their wives and their many children and their servants, over 1 million people. But yet Moses obeyed the Lord. He brought the 70 elders together. In verse 25 of chapter 11, the Lord came down in the cloud and spoke with him. He took of the Spirit that was on him and put the Spirit on the 70 elders. When the Spirit rested on them, they prophesied, but they did not do so again. In verse 31, a wind went out from the Lord and drove quail in from the sea. It brought them down all around the camp to about 3 feet above the ground. Can you imagine 3 feet of quail? 3 feet, like as tall as a child, of quail on the ground, as far as a day's walk in any direction. So again, God's being faithful. He is giving the Israelites what they ask for. And he does it, I love how he does it his own way. It's like, sometimes when you watch a movie, you can predict like how it's going to turn out or what's going to happen next. I mean, our God is so unpredictable, but so faithful. So after he brought the quail down, the Lord burned with anger against the people who craved the other food, and they were struck with a plague. And that brings us to the end of chapter 11. We're now in chapter 12. So it starts off with Miriam and Aaron gossiping about Moses. They question why God speaks through Moses. In verse 3, I want to read this one aloud. It says in verse 3, in parentheses actually, Moses was a very humble man, more humble than anyone else on the face of the earth. So that shows you right there. He wasn't out boasting about how God speaks through him. It was really the jealousy of Miriam and Aaron. The Lord calls all 3 of them, Miriam, Aaron, and Moses, to the tent of meeting. In Numbers chapter 12, verse 5, the Lord came down in a pillar of cloud. He stood at the entrance to the tent and summoned Aaron and Miriam. When both of them stepped forward, in verse 6, he said, listen to my words. When a prophet of the Lord is among you, I reveal myself to him in visions. I speak to him in dreams. Verse 7, but this is not true of my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. Verse 8, with him I speak face to face, clearly, not in riddles. He sees the form of the Lord. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? Miriam was then struck with leprosy. Moses cries out to the Lord on her behalf. The Lord instructs Moses to confine Miriam outside the camp for 7 days. Then she is allowed to return. And that again just shows the nobility and the grace that Moses has for these people. These people were gossiping about him, and when they were punished, he still begged the Lord for mercy for them, and it was granted. Chapter 13. The Lord instructs Moses to send some men to explore Canaan. I'm going to read for you verses 17 through 20 of chapter 13. In verse 17, when Moses sent them to explore Canaan, he said, go up through Negev and on into the hill country. Verse 18, see what the land is like and whether the people who live there are strong or weak, few or many. Verse 19, what kind of land do they live in? Is it good or bad? What kind of towns do they live in? Are they unwalled or fortified? Verse 20, how is the soil? Is it fertile or poor? Are the trees on it or not? Do your best to bring back some of the fruit of the land. It was the season for the first ripe grapes. For 40 days, the men that Moses had told to go explored the land. Verse 27 and 28 of chapter 13. So they returned back from the land after exploring it. They gave Moses this account. We went into the land to which you sent us. It does flow with milk and honey. Here is its fruit. Verse 28, but the people who live there are powerful. The cities are fortified and very large. We even saw descendants of Enoch there. So Caleb, one of the men that went to explore this land, quieted the people before Moses and says they should go and take possession of the land. It says in verse 31, but the men who had gone up with him, so the other explorers, because Caleb was one of the men that went to explore the land, said, we can't attack those people. They are stronger than we are. In verse 32, they spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land they had explored. They said, the land we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw are of a great size. Verse 33, we saw the Nephilim there. The descendants of Anak came from the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. So that's chapter 13 actually sets up chapter 14. So chapter 14, I have my notes. The Israelites begin grumbling again in verse 3. Why is the Lord bringing us to this land only to let us fall by the sword? Our wives and children will be taken as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt? Verse 4, and they said to each other, we should choose a leader and go back to Egypt. So Joshua and Caleb, who had explored the land, told the Israelites the land was good. It was flowing with milk and honey. And if the Lord was pleased with them, he will lead them there. But do not rebel against the Lord, they warned the other Israelites. But do not be afraid of the people of the Lord. Verse 11. The Lord said to Moses, how long will these people treat me with contempt? How long will they refuse to believe in me, in spite of all the miraculous signs I have performed among them? Verse 12, I will strike them down with a plague and destroy them, but I will make you into a nation greater and stronger than they. Again, Moses intercedes on behalf of the Israelites. In verse 19, in accordance with your great love, forgive the sin of these people, just as you have pardoned them from the time they left Egypt until now. I have, the Lord forgives the Israelites, but he will not allow anyone who witnessed his miracles in Egypt and in the desert to see the promised land. The only ones, actually there's two of them, the only ones he will spare are Caleb and Joshua. All the other explorers who were spreading the bad reports about the land they had explored died from a plague. The Israelites still choose to disobey the Lord's command. In verse 42 of chapter 14, Moses is talking. Do not go up because the Lord is not with you. You will be defeated by your enemies. The Israelites were still disobedient even after the warning from Moses. And chapter 14 ends with verse 45. Then the Amalekites and Canaanites who lived in that hill country came down and attacked them and beat them down all the way to Hormah. Chapter 15. So this chapter, Bible scholars, I almost called you tribe. Well, you are a tribe, but you're Bible scholars. It's a chapter of instruction. The Lord gives Moses directions to give the Israelites regarding 1, supplementary offerings, and 2, offerings for unintentional sins. That's the first part of chapter 15. The next part is about a man who was found gathering wood on the Sabbath. Remember, the Lord has been very, very clear that you work for 6 days. On the 7th day, you must rest and observe the Sabbath. He was gathering wood on the Sabbath, and that goes against the direction because he was working, and there's no work on the Sabbath. I wanted to read for you verse 36 of chapter 15. Moses went to the Lord about it, and the Lord said that he must die. So in verse 36, the assembly took him outside the camp and stoned him to death as the Lord commanded Moses. The last part of chapter 15 is about tassels on garments. I wanted to read for you verses 38 through 41. Verse 38 of chapter 15, the Lord said to Moses, speak to the Israelites and say to them, throughout the generations to come, you are to make tassels on the corners of your garments with a blue cord on each tassel. Verse 39, you will have these tassels to look at, and so you will remember all the commands of the Lord, that you may obey them and not prostitute yourselves by going after the lusts of your own hearts and eyes. In verse 40, then you will remember to obey all my commands and will be consecrated to the Lord. And I just love this last verse. I included it because I love it. Verse 41, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt to be your God. I am the Lord your God. All right, Bible scholars, that ends the review of today's reading, Numbers chapters 11 through 15. Tomorrow, we will be reviewing 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20. So 16 through 20. If this is your first video of Numbers, I will link the first 2 videos of our reviews of the first book of Numbers down below. As always, any questions, comments, concerns, or revelations, leave them in the comments below. I will see you in our next video. Bye, scholars.